Volunteer groups regularly visit to hand out blankets, clean water, and hot meals, but the help is only temporary. It's become less of a community space and more of a makeshift shelter. Some businesses have reduced their hours or left the area because customers no longer feel comfortable walking through it at night. How does a city with a budget of hundreds of billions of dollars a year allow such a situation to exist? The question is not easy to answer neatly. It lies in the intersection of many factors: ineffective housing policies, income inequality, inadequate social services, and an administrative apparatus that is not fast enough to respond. Some people say that this is a normal part of big cities. But can it be considered normal when every night tens of thousands of people have to lie down on the unstable line between the oblivion of society and the dangers arising from the environment in which they are forced to live? Number 2. An order that is difficult to control. In many parts of New York City, especially the East Village, informal transactions take place in broad daylight. Some of them are homeless, undocumented, and often have no other way to make money in the current climate. In park corners like Tompkins Square or near abandoned train stations, exchanges happen quickly, sometimes involving more than just necessities, and often involving things beyond the control of aid agencies. Starting in 2022, New York City will begin rethinking how it handles behaviors that fall into legal gray areas, especially those involving consensual adults. A bill introduced by a state Senate advocacy group has sparked fierce debate. Supporters say it should be reclassified and focused on social support rather than deterrence. Opponents worry that the change could spiral out of control, especially in already densely populated areas like the East Village and Lower Manhattan. The city government had pledged to increase investment in support centers from $2.1 billion to $2.8 billion in the 2022-2024 period. However, the actual disbursement rate has been slower than expected due to licensing procedures, lack of specialized staff, and resistance from some residents against opening centers near residential areas. This tug-of-war has forced thousands of people in need of access to services to continue waiting or give up altogether. Is it possible for someone in a state of emergency to fully comply with the norms of behavior without access to any form of essential support? With more than 37% of homeless New Yorkers having had steady employment for 3 years prior to their current situation, the picture suggests that homelessness is not a choice, but a consequence of a massive breakdown in social support systems. In a city of more than 8.5 million people, where each neighborhood can have its own identity and pace of life, the connection between policy and practice cannot be further delayed. When the weakest links are left to fend for themselves amid chaos, what matters more is not who is doing what wrong, but who is not being given a chance to start over. Every city has a line between security and freedom. The question is whether that line is drawn by fear or by a system strong enough to prevent tragedy from becoming normal. Number 3. Order is pushed underground. New York's public transportation system is considered the lifeblood of the city. But in recent years, major train stations such as Penn Station Grand Central and stations in the Bronx and Harlem have become temporary shelters for people with nowhere else to go. The fact that many individuals are living amid the daily traffic not only reflects the stalemate of social security policy, but also poses a difficult problem for law enforcement agencies in maintaining order without increasing tensions. Since late 2023, the city has been implementing a crackdown on major subway lines to reduce the number of people sleeping in stations. In a report released earlier this year, the NYPD said it had increased night patrols in hotspots by nearly 60%, but the actual impact has been unclear. Every time the patrols leave, people return to their previous locations within hours. This is not an act of rebellion, but simply because they have no other viable options. Many shelters are overwhelmed with waiting lists lasting weeks, while some centers only accept applications during business hours. At Atlantic Avenue Barclays Center, maintenance workers recorded 3 times in just 1 week that emergency elevators were blocked by people lying in front of the doors. Such situations not only disrupt operations, but also confuse many passengers, especially when no one in the station knows how to respond appropriately. At Grand Central, a passenger once had to wait nearly 10 minutes because of a collision between 2 people fighting for a spot in front of the doors of Car 5. These seemingly small incidents clearly show the pressure that builds up in an already overcrowded environment. According to an October 2024 report from the Metropolitan Transportation Authority MTA 28, 7% of frontline workers said they had difficulty handling situations involving people without a fixed residence at the station. In most cases, these incidents are not dangerous, but they are enough to disrupt operations and create a sense of loss of control in the flow of people. When people sleep on emergency exits or use benches as extended rest areas, the system has little flexibility to respond other than waiting for support teams to intervene, and they can't be at all 472 stations across the city at any one time. Some lines like the AD&E, which run through the Bronx, Harlem, and Midtown, are among the most volatile. These trains have been known to cause minor collisions from eye contact, bumping into bags, or just reacting to fatigue. In a confined space like a train car, where people are only an arm's length away from each other, any action can be interpreted in multiple ways. The Safe Options Support Program was launched to address the tension points with a team of social workers accompanying the police. However, as of the first quarter of 2025, only 15 major stations had direct response teams, while smaller stations received an average of 1-200 reports of similar situations every day. The gap between response capacity and actual scale is significant. Stability doesn't come from adding more cameras or more police officers. It comes from clarifying the goal. A city that is sustainable over the long term must be a place where people have the basic necessities to not have to seek shelter amid the rush of people rushing home. Number 4. The American Dream. Homelessness in New York is not an isolated incident, but a reflection of deep cracks in the city's economic structure. One of the most obvious causes is the persistent imbalance between income and cost of living. In 2024, the median rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan exceeded $4,500 a month, while the median wage for a full-time working-class job was just $3,500 before taxes. This has forced many to share living space or move out of the city's downtown core. For those without a strong family support system or social network, the line between stability and instability is an unpaid bill. Even for those fortunate enough to keep their jobs, access to stable housing in New York is increasingly elusive. A report by the City Housing Commission released in early 2025 found that waiting lists for a supportive apartment can range from 18 months to more than 3 years, depending on the neighborhood. Meanwhile, the number of affordable housing units coming online each year is only about 4,000 towns, at least 60% below the actual need. In addition to housing issues, the cost of healthcare, especially mental health, is depriving many people of long-term stability. More than 30 community health centers have had to cut services after 2022 due to lack of funding. Data from the city's Department of Health shows that in 2023, 28.4% of people without stable housing were diagnosed with mental health support, but most of them were unable to access adequate treatment. When emergency pandemic support programs, such as rental subsidies, eviction moratoriums, and temporary paychecks ended at the end of 2021, many families immediately faced significant financial pressure. In the first quarter of 2022 alone, the city recorded more than 14,000 early lease terminations due to inability to pay. one need not travel far to see the growing gap between those who have enough and those who do not. One need only stand at the intersection of a gated community and a bus stop where a few people are huddled waiting for the morning to see the difference. And as those gaps widen by the day, how society responds with support or silence will reveal what the city is prioritizing: administrative efficiency or the ability to hold people together through humane policy. Number 5. City of two attitudes. The divide in New Yorkers' response to the homeless crisis is evident from neighborhood to neighborhood. While some residents are actively participating in volunteer groups donating food and clothing, and connecting with organizations like the Bowery Mission and the Coalition for the Homeless, others are taking a more polarizing stance, vehemently opposing the opening of more shelters near their homes. On the Upper West Side, for example, when the city moved more than 200 people from the shelter system to a hotel in the area in mid-2023, within weeks, more than 14,000 signatures had been collected and sent to the city council. Some residents formed online groups, brought in lawyers, and held meetings to protest the decision. The reasons were not a lack of compassion, but concerns about safety, neighborhood cleanliness, and the impact on real estate values. In Bushwick, a heavily immigrant neighborhood in Brooklyn, the response has been different. Community groups like Churches United for Fair Housing regularly work with the government to create temporary housing for the homeless and mobilize local charities to distribute meals on weekends. Support for assistance in the neighborhood, according to a 2024 NYU survey, is nearly 72%, severely 20 percentage points higher than the city average. How communities respond not only affects daily life, but also directly affects the sustainability of the city's support system. How far a city can grow is determined not just by GDP or the number of infrastructure projects, but also by how it accommodates those most vulnerable to being pushed out. When people who live close together are far apart in their views, long-term stability is not easy to maintain. Number 6. Image of the cracked city New York used to welcome more than 66 million visitors a year, but by 2025, that number is expected to drop to about 64.1 million, nearly 3.5 million lower than the original target. Instead of growing steadily as expected, the city's tourism industry is slowing down. Part of the reason is global volatility, but it's also an internal factor: the city's changing reality. At popular destinations like Times Square, Penn Station, and Central Park, travelers are increasingly reporting unpleasant experiences. According to a survey by NYC and Company, 4% of international travelers felt less safe when passing through areas with people sleeping outdoors or minor conflicts near transportation hubs. These seemingly insignificant details can have a significant impact on the overall experience. The government has implemented several rounds of temporary relocations of homeless people to support centers, especially before international events. But this approach has been met with backlash for being more image manipulation than a fundamental solution. A hasty cleanup to welcome visitors may brighten up the streets temporarily, but it does not change the actual impression people get when they step foot on the streets. Visitors' impressions are not just about the landscape or the service. They are also about how a city treats its most vulnerable people. And in New York, that impression is increasingly questioned. Number 7. Remnants of old policies. New York's homeless crisis is not a new phenomenon. The city has gone through tumultuous times in the past decades with consequences that continue to this day. Starting in the 1970s, when the financial crisis nearly depleted the city's budget, thousands of people were forced to leave their homes as buildings became abandoned or severely degraded. This was also the time when many psychiatric hospitals closed or scaled back, leaving people in need with no place to turn. By the 1980s, the streets of Manhattan and the area near the Williamsburg Bridge were filled with tent cities. The scenes were documented in numerous television reports of the time, But rather than marking a sweeping policy shift, the response was largely one of local control. Some measures were introduced as an emergency measure, but not enough to build a stable long-term support system. In 2008, when the housing market collapsed, tens of thousands of New Yorkers defaulted on their loans or were abruptly terminated from their leases. The Bronx was hit hardest as unemployment soared and the local welfare system struggled to keep up. In 3 years, the number of people on the housing waiting list doubled, but the supply remained virtually unchanged. The problems that have accumulated over the years are coming to the fore in the post-pandemic period of 2022. Temporary assistance programs provided short-term stability, but when they ended, the number of people who could no longer afford to rent increased dramatically. At the same time, a wave of migration from southern states to New York overwhelmed the shelter system. Not only longtime residents, but also newcomers were forced to jostle for positions on the waiting list for assistance. Looking back, it becomes clear that what is happening today is not simply a one-off event. It is the result of a series of decisions cuts and omissions that spans more than 50 years. And without systemic change, this cycle is likely to continue. The intersection of history and the present suggests that it is time for a real shift, not just to patch up the status quo, but to prevent further consequences. Number 8. The path to reintegration. Amid the daunting numbers and challenging realities, there are stories that show change is possible, if not easy. Jessica, a woman who spent nearly 2 years bouncing between Brooklyn's train stations and parks, now has a full-time job and a stable place to live at 90 Sands, a non-profit-run supportive housing complex. She has access to an integrated housing program that provides tenants with not only shelter, but also mental health counseling, career support, and a roadmap to reintegration into society. This model, called supportive housing, combines long-term housing with essential social services. According to a report by the New York Housing Conference, the rate of rehomelessness among those who participate in this program is 60% lower than those who only receive short-term assistance. Although the initial investment is higher in the long run, it is a more cost-effective solution than typical emergency interventions, such as moving into hotels or temporary shelters. Another inspiring story is that of Liz Murray. Growing up in the Bronx, Liz slept at bus stops and temporary homes while persevering through school. She eventually received a full scholarship to a top university and has since become an inspiration for youth empowerment programs in several states. Her story is a clear example of how circumstances can be reversed with the right support. However, the number of such effective support models is still not enough to meet the actual needs. According to statistics in early 2025, the city still needs about 25,000 more supportive housing units to basically address the most vulnerable population groups. The challenge is that the annual budget allocation is only enough to build about 1,500 new units, meaning that it will take at least 10 years to achieve the goal without breakthrough changes in policy and resources. At this point, the snapshots of New York are no longer just numbers or surface images. We are witnessing a city moving at high speed, but leaving too many people behind. It's not just about housing order or tourism. It's about how the city treats those who live on the thinnest of boundaries. Between the growth and the unrest between the media campaigns and the reality on the streets, it is worth thinking. What kind of city is New York choosing to be? One that prioritizes external image, or one that is firmly grounded in real people and real problems? What gets prioritized and what gets delayed will define the city's identity in the eyes of its residents. Not on tourist postcards. Number 9. System mirror. New York is not short of resources. It has a strong financial system, a vast network of public services, and is a center for social innovation. Yet it is also experiencing an existential crisis in the midst of daily life. Public spaces are becoming shelters, and people who once had homes are now struggling to survive in the most crowded city in the country. What is clear is that this is not just a question of where to live, but also a question of how people are treated when they lose their most basic foundation. Not everyone has the ability to step out of difficulty on their own, but cities have the ability to create the conditions so that they are not left behind. When we see someone sitting silently in the middle of a crowded street, how we choose to react sometimes says the most about the society we live in. New York is a place where dreams converge, but it is also a place that most clearly reflects the limits of a system that is no longer capable of keeping everyone moving forward. What we have just seen is not only the dark side of a city, but a reminder that urban development requires more than beautiful numbers. Today's story does not end with a solution, but with a pause for reflection. This is NVL Travel Documentary, where we take you to places that are not only worth visiting, but also need to be understood more deeply. See you on the next journey, where the hidden corners will continue.
Welcome to NVL Travel Documentary.
Texas, the heartland of America with its sunny highways, country music, and American dreams. But beneath the glitz and glamour lies a reality that no one wants to see: areas that are not marked on maps, where people live without addresses, without citizenship, without hope. You won't find this place on a travel brochure. This is a Texas that few dare to enter, not because it's dangerous, but because the truth is too harsh. On this journey, we will open a door that most people deliberately ignore. Number 1. No way to return. Texas is now one of the states with the highest homeless populations in the United States. As of early 2024, statistics from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development (HUD) recorded more than 27,000 people without stable housing across the state. That's a nearly 12% increase from the previous year, reflecting a rapid decline in housing access for thousands of residents. Notably, Austin recorded 3,200 cases, nearly double the number from just 3 years ago. Houston was no better with more than 3,280, Dallas 3,718, and San Antonio around 3,400. What these regions have in common is a growing gap between median income and basic living costs. According to the 2024 Texas Real Wage Survey, the statewide median wage is about $48,000 a year. Meanwhile, the rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Austin has surpassed $2,000 a month. This means that a person with a steady income will still have to spend more than 50% of their income on housing alone, not to mention utilities, food, and healthcare. In Houston, hundreds of people are living in their cars in parking lots near supermarkets, 24-hour gyms, or on the side of a warehouse. Dallas has seen a surge in makeshift shelters built from scrap materials under freeways with little sanitation or security. In San Antonio, some people have set up camp outside assistance centers because the waiting list has been full for months. Have you ever walked past someone sleeping on the sidewalk in the midday sun or in the morning dew and wondered what brought them there? Not all of them are unemployed. Not all of them choose to live on the streets. In most cases, they did everything right. Got a job, paid their taxes, lived frugally. They just got left behind by a sharp jump in home prices. Up to 60% of Texas's large cities are homeless overnight. The rest are living in a rotating cast of acquaintances, churches, bus stops, or private vehicles. Humanitarian organizations say the actual number is likely higher than the official statistics, as thousands of people live hidden without access to support systems. The problem is not just where we live, but how quickly we are pushing people beyond the margins of economic safety. As personal protective equipment is eroded, a single health event job loss or rent increase can leave a family without a place to return. And this is happening every day in neighborhoods that were once safe and organized. Number 2. Even the law is powerless. In Austin, the areas around I-35 under the overpasses near Cesar Chavez and the Arch area, once known as temporary support areas, have become out-of-control hotspots. There have been a steady increase in incidents over the past 2 years, with police interventions dropping sharply due to staffing shortages and high-risk assessments. Austin is expected to have a shortage of about 400 officers by 2024, forcing response teams to prioritize densely populated areas or event locations. As a result, many encampments have grown into transportation corridors, lakes, or woods close to residential areas. Dallas has a similar story. Informal settlements have been steadily growing since mid-2023 under the intersections of I-30 and I-45. This has been accompanied by a marked increase in substance use. According to the regional health system, hospitalizations for methamphetamine increased by 19% in the first quarter of 2020 alone. Each time the city clears, the people who leave simply move to new locations, often deeper into residential areas or adjacent to abandoned lots where there is little control. Houston faces a higher risk of spread, especially along Buffalo Bayou and near I-45. Over the past 12 months, health departments have reported more than 1,200 fentanyl-related emergency calls in the area. The steep terrain proximity to the river and lack of lighting and surveillance in many areas make it an easy but extremely unsafe hiding place, especially at night. In San Antonio, once a bright spot for its centralized support model, pockets of homeless people have begun to appear in areas around Haven for Hope and along San Pedro Creek. Some areas near the shopping center have also seen a 10% increase in violence over the previous year, mostly concentrated in areas that were cleared but failed to maintain social support. So as the areas that were once designated for temporary shelters disappear, where can homeless people go? Being pushed out of the center doesn't make the problem go away. It just pushes it to less monitored areas with less light, less people, and less access to services. Moving doesn't mean settling down. At the current pace of urban development, temporary transition areas are proliferating rapidly, not because the government has built them, but because people have no other choice. Large cities are facing the consequences of a policy of forced displacement without alternatives fast enough, large enough, and safe enough to create real change. When the primary response is relocation, the problem continues to spread without any signs of stopping. Number 3. The cost of a delicious life. In Austin, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment topped $2,000 per month in the second quarter of 2024, up more than 95% from 2014. Dallas and Houston aren't far behind, ranging from $1,800 to $950, depending on the area. Meanwhile, the typical hourly wage in the service industry, which makes up the bulk of the workforce, is just $16 to $19 per hour. With that income after deducting fixed expenses, many people are in a budget deficit at the start of the month. This is no longer the case. According to 2024 data from the Texas Bureau of Labor Statistics, about 58% of renters in major metropolitan areas spend more than 40% of their income on housing, far exceeding the federal threshold for financial security. The disparity between cost of living and income creates a form of persistent inequality, working full-time, but still not making a decent living. Another factor that increases risk is the cost of uninsured medical care and essential food. Over the past 36 months, consumer food prices in Texas have increased by an average of 22%, with meat, dairy, and eggs rising by more than 30%. For low-income earners, meal budgets have to be reduced to keep rent, leading to potential health and nutritional problems, especially for seniors and part-time workers. The question is, how much effort is enough to maintain a minimal life with a roof over their heads, clean water, and basic food? While the urban economic system continues to grow, a large number of people are losing the ability to maintain their positions even while still